Hello and welcome to another Intro to HTML video. In the previous video, we built all of the HTML markup from this comp. This comp image is basically a graphical breakdown of what our web page is going to look like. It has a structure of all of the different semantic components, kind of like our header, our nav. We have a div that will be called feature. We had our columns, and we had our figures, and we had our footer down there. This comp is what we used to design our HTML, and our HTML looked like this. We had a wrapper, a header, our H1, a nav with a UL and a bunch of LIs. We had our feature, which contained an image, an H2, and a paragraph. We had our main content, which contained 3 articles, each one having an H2, 3 paragraphs. And in the first article, I put a figure with an image and a fig caption. In our right column, which I called sidebar, I made a div called ID sidebar. There is an article with an H2, a figure, and 3 paragraphs. You should have gotten all of this HTML in the previous video. If you do not have the same markup that I started from in the previous video, you need to go back and make sure that you get it exactly the way I had it. One thing that you might notice is a little bit different. In the previous video, I did not have any of the lorem ipsum placeholder text in any of these paragraphs, and I added some. And then in my images, I did not have any references to actual images. Well, I put some references in there. So you might want to pause the video, take some time to go through all of your paragraphs, so the one in the feature, the ones in all of the articles, and just give it some lorem ipsum text so that you have something that actually will display in the browser and have some content in there. When we looked at it before, it was essentially empty. So take a minute to pause. Fill out your web page so that you have all the stuff that you need, and come back and we will start on the next phase of this project. All right, you're back. That means you probably have all of your content filled out into your web pages, and now we're going to go about resizing things and getting this laid out into the 2-column layout that we want. First thing that we need to address is resizing things. If we look at our comp, there are specific sizes for the web page. It says that the whole page width of my comp was 1024 pixels wide. Okay, that's the whole width of this image page. Now, it says that the wrapper is going to be 825 pixels wide. Well, it says specifically the header is, but our whole page here, which is going to be in a wrapper, is 825 pixels wide. Well, if you know anything about the way that I've been teaching this, you know that I never use absolute units on widths of things, because what that's going to do is going to make it so that the web page is not fluid or flexible, and it's not going to grow and shrink with the size of the browser. So you know that I'm probably going to translate this to relative units. I'm going to translate these things to percentages, and the way I do that is by figuring out what percentage our target makes up of the context. So target and context. Let's think about that for a second. Right now, let's say that I was going to try and figure out how wide my wrapper needs to be. The thing that I want to figure out how wide it's going to be as a percentage is going to be my target. So in this case, the wrapper width is my target. The context is the container that is holding that thing, that target. So the thing that's holding my wrapper is the page. And if the page is 1024 wide and the wrapper is 825 wide, we would want to divide 825 by 1024 to figure out what the percentage width, what percent width the wrapper is of the whole page. Make sense? Well, let's take a look at this. So my wrapper is right here, and I'm going to make a style sheet where I will select wrapper, and I want to set the width on it. Now, what I need to do is I need to divide my target by my context. My target is 825 divided by my context, which is 1024. Okay, so that's going to give me my percentage. I'm just going to go to my calculator, divide 825 by 1024, and I'll get my decimal. Well, this decimal translates into a percentage relatively easy. I just have to shift the decimal place over by 2. I'm going to copy this value, and I'm just going to paste it directly in here. I'm going to move my decimal place over, and it's 80.56640.625% width. I don't care how many decimal places are here. I'm just going to keep all of the ones that the computer gives me, and the browser will determine what kind of precision it needs on that decimal. You can add as many decimal places as you want. Okay? And usually after something like this, when I make these calculations for a percentage based on target divided by context, I make a comment next to it that looks like this. 825 divided by 1024. That tells us what this value is. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the whole comp and we're going to start figuring out the widths of things. We're going to start fleshing out the overall width of our page. If I save this and look at it in the browser, you're going to see it's going to constrain down to roughly 80% width, right? You can see that goes over about 80%. That's great. That's exactly what I want to see. Another thing about the comp is that you'll notice when you look at the comp, there is an even margin on either side. We know how to do this. We've done this before. If we want to get something to be totally centered, like a wrapper, we want to set the margins on left and right to auto. So I'll just do margin, 0, auto. And you may recall that when we do this, the 0 is selecting the top and bottom of my box and setting the margins to 0. And the auto is selecting the left and right sides of my box and setting those to automatically set so that they're equal. So if I go back to my browser and refresh it, I still have to save it first. Go back to my browser and refresh it, you're going to see it's going to sit in the center. All right, so the only thing that we've done here is we've set the width. We divided by our target of 825 by the context 1024 and got our percentage and set the margins. So now we've got to go through the rest of this whole document and set the widths of things. So let's look at the comp again. We notice that the header is 825 wide, so we don't have to set the width of the header. It's just going to go stretch edge to edge in the wrapper. Now the nav is going to be 706 pixels wide. So I'm going to select nav, width, and it was going to be 706, which is my target, divided by the context. Now, the context of this is this nav is inside of my wrapper. If my wrapper is 825 pixels wide, my nav is 706. We would say the 706 of the nav is my target. The 825 of my wrapper is the context. So 706 divided by 825 gives us 85.577. It's a repeating decimal. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste this in here. And shift my decimal place, add the percent, save it, and let's see if it's actually the right width. You know, it might not be obvious right now because we have to do some other things to the nav that we'll work on those later. But the nav now is actually that 80% width. We just can't see it because we haven't styled the nav. We'll style the nav in a future video, and you'll see that it's actually that correct width. Now let's go to the width of the next thing down. The next thing down is my feature, and you can see the feature is exactly as wide as the nav is. Okay? So we've got 706 pixels wide for the feature in a context of 825. You know what? I'm just going to copy this because it's all exactly the same. So I'll go feature and paste it. Since 706 is the width of my feature, 825 was the context, it's still going to be 85% wide. If we go to the browser and refresh it, we'll see now, yep, this is 85% wide. We also saw that the feature was centered. So we know to center it, we set the margins to 0 and auto. So I'm just going to copy it from my wrapper and paste it in. So my feature is now figured out. The width is set to 85% roughly, and the margins are set to 0 auto, and that's going to give us that feature that's 85% width and sitting in the center of its area. Okay? And there it is right there. Let's move on to the next thing. The next thing is going to be my main content. The main content is 523 pixels wide, and the context is the whole wrapper. So the wrapper is 825, 523 divided by 825. Main content. So 523 divided by 825. I'm going to just double check my numbers. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. It was 523 pixels wide out of a wrapper width of 825. So 523 divided by 825. That gives us a 63.3939393939 repeating. Copy it, and we want as much precision as possible. I'll paste it in, shift my decimal place, add my percentage, save it, and I will check it. And there, it's now that 63% width. Great. Now I'm going to take a look at the width of my my feature figure. Okay, so the figure inside of the main. I'm going to go to that figure right here, and I'm just going to give it a class. I'm going to call it main figure. All right, that's how we're going to select it, was with this class selector. So I'll make a style rule up here, dot main figure. And if we look at it, it's supposed to be 170 pixels wide. So the target is 170, and the context is 523. So 170 divided by 523. Make my calculation, 170 divided by 523, and we've got 32% roughly. So I'll copy this, and once again, I want that full value. I don't want to just estimate and set it's roughly this and then type in 32%, because that might not be exactly what we need. And the browser will truncate the decimal where it needs to. It will do the rounding. We don't want to do the rounding for it. We want as much precision as possible and let the browser decide what precision it actually wants. Save it, check it in the browser, and we'll know that there's a problem here. We're not going to see the change in the width. The image is not scaling down. If you remember back to a previous video, we talked about making flexible images that scale up and down with the size of the figure. And we'll come back and fix this stuff in the next video. But for now, I'm just worried about the sizes of things. The next thing in the comp that I see, a measurement here, is 50 pixels. That 50 pixels is the right margin on the figure. So if the context is 523, 50 pixels is the width of that margin, I can figure out that percentage, which is going to be 50 divided by 523. That gives me the percentage of 9.56 and some change. So I'll copy that, and this is my right margin. Margin dash right. Paste that in, make it a decimal place. Make it a percentage, and it was 50 divided by 523. There we go. Save it. I'm not even going to preview it because it's not going to show up just because there's, the image isn't sized right and the figure doesn't have a background color. So, but we do have those sizes correct. Let's look back at the comp. What's the next thing? The next thing is figuring out the right column, which is 302 pixels wide out of the context of 825. So target is 302, context is 825. So 302 divided by 825 gives us 36 and some change. I will copy this, and this one was called my sidebar. Put the decimal place in there, put the percentage symbol in there. I'll make my comment. I'll have to look back at those numbers again because my memory is short. It was 302 divided by 825. Save it. Refresh it. And did my column shrink down? Yes, it did. There we go. Ooh, I notice I'm missing my image here in that figure. So I'll insert that right now. I'll go down to my sidebar, div ID sidebar. I've got my image, cat.jpg. All right, so now I've resized the column. Now I've got to resize the figure inside the sidebar. So I'm going to go back to my markup, go to this figure, I'm going to give it a class. And I think I called the one above main figure. I'm going to call this one side figure. And once again, it's 266 is my target out of a context of 302. So 266 divided by 302 gives us that. 266 divided by 302. So go up to my style sheet. And we saw that the figure was sitting right in the center. So that means it's got auto margins on left and right. And we're just going to set the margin on the top to 0 for now. So we're not going to be able to see that change happened because once again, the image is not set to be flexible. We'll do that in the next video. Go back to our comp. We've got all of these sizes from top down to here finished. The footer takes up the full width. Now, we just want to make these two things into columns because they're not sitting side by side in our web page yet. I want to do that now, and then I'll be done with this video. And then we'll move on to all of the specific adding colors, pixel pushing, get the images set to be flexible, and all the good stuff to make this whole page come together. So to make these things columns, remember I need to float my main content and my sidebar left. I'll just copy this, float left, copy the float left, and I'll go down to my sidebar and I'll paste it in. I'm going to save it. I'll check it in the browser and see if they float side by side, which they are. They're floating side by side, but this looks bad. Once again, the images don't do what they're supposed to do. They're not behaving. We'll take care of that in a future video. But I do have my columns. Now my footer isn't behaving. You can see my footer is sitting up here. So if you think back to making a multi-column layout, there's one thing that we had to do was clear the footer. Take a look at it in the browser. My footer should snap down to the bottom, which it did. All right, so we've got our HTML sorted out. We've got all of our sizes sorted out. Now, I'm doing these things in a very specific order because if you have the comp, these are the things that you kind of want to think of first. You want to get your web page so that you've got the proper HTML markup first, and then you're going to build from there. Once you have the markup structure, the HTML structure, then you're going to start styling it. The first thing that I think about when styling is the sizes of things. I want to make sure the sizes are correct, and I put them in their places where they need to go. After that, then we're going to start thinking about the images, making them flexible, making sure that the figures work the way they should work. We're going to start thinking about colors a little bit, and then lastly, I start thinking about type. I usually always do the typography last. Other designers do it in a different place. There's no right or wrong time to do it, but the best things to do first is get your HTML markup sorted out and get your sizes sorted out. From there, you can start thinking about all of the other style stuff. Thanks for watching.